The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Good day, everybody. Welcome to The Fire You Can't Put Out. My name is Melvin, on another solo one with you today. I want to thank you for tuning in to our friend Kevin, who is, well, Kevin's one of the busiest individuals that I know. And so he won't be with me again this week, and so I want to wish him the best out there. He'll be with us soon, I'm sure. And to Angela also a very, very busy individual, who hasn't been on a few shows, but we anticipate her return eventually. So if she's out there listening, I'd just like to say hello, Angela. Thinking about you here, and I hope all is well out there. And to Leo, I feel fairly certain that you're listening, brother. Yeah, we'll get you back on one of these days. We're just dealing with some technical things right now, but hey, that's all inside baseball stuff. Let me start with this week. Quite a bit of news this week. This is the week ending in July 13th. This is show number 25, and there's quite a few things that I want to talk about. First of all, let me start with Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden, now this is still going on. We are, I guess next week we'll be going into week number 4. This is week number 3, and he is still sitting in the Moscow airport's transit zone. Now, you may remember last week, Snowden asked Russia for asylum. And they said, well, you can stay here as long as you don't release any more of America's secrets. And Snowden roundly rejected that. A few other countries have since offered him asylum. Here's the issue, though. Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia have offered him asylum. It's, however, virtually impossible to chart a flight plan to those nations that doesn't include traveling over or refueling in a U.S.-friendly country that could demand an inspection of the plane and detain him. Now, nations have full exclusive jurisdiction over their airspace, so any plane carrying Snowden could be forced to land if it flies over the territory of a country that's willing to help American authorities capture the fugitive intelligence contractor. And, of course, Snowden still faces felony charges here. Snowden's best hope for breaking out of the transit area most likely hinges on whether or not he could sneak onto one of 5 weekly direct flights to Havana, Cuba. Now, here's the thing. If he wants to make a direct flight from Moscow to Havana or Caracas with fuel to spare, the Airbus A340 has a range of about 9,000 miles, and the Boeing 777 can fly for 9,400 miles with fuel to spare. But a direct flight would mean passing over the airspace of European nations and possibly the United States. And chartering such an aircraft would be expensive, about $100,000. Now, if I remember correctly, he's still getting help from Julian Assange from WikiLeaks. I believe that they are raising money for him right now, but he still sits in the transit area. So realizing the mounting impossibility of getting out of the transit area of the Russian airport, Snowden has now said, well, okay, Russia, maybe I will accept your offer of asylum. But Putin is starting to lose patience with him, quite honestly. So, in a Quinnipiac poll, it was asked, and this is interesting because there is obviously as much as people like to say that with Democrats and Republicans, it really is just two heads of the same monster, it's not. They're generally insanely different on pretty much everything. But this was interesting to me. This is, like I said, from Quinnipiac. These are views on Snowden. Okay, so when asked, is Snowden a traitor? 38% of Republicans said yeah. 39% of Democrats said yeah. It's pretty close, Is he a whistleblower? 55% said Republican. 55% of the Republicans said yeah, and then 49% of Democrats said yeah. Now, there's a stark difference. It's very important that Snowden, for his own sake certainly, And I think for us too, because we don't want to scare away whistleblowers, but certainly for his own sake and for his own freedom, it's very important that he is seen as a whistleblower, because whistleblowers get protection. They're not seen as lawbreakers. They're essentially seen as freedom fighters. People that are just exposing what the general population needs to know. So if he's called a leaker, well, that really comes with no protection. That's just a lot of trouble that you're looking at. So even with as different as the parties are, they're essentially about the same place on Snowden. For the most part, people appreciate what Snowden has done. So that's this week in Snowden. Obviously, there's going to be something again next week, so we'll probably start each show with, where in the world is Snowden this week? My guess is that next week he's probably still going to be in the transit area of the Russian airport, but we'll see. I want to get into the 113th Congress, which is on par to be the most do-nothing Congress ever. Now, initially, the whole do-nothing phrase, of course, comes from, the 112th, the last Congress. And by the way, every 2 years we obviously get a new Congress, because 1/3 of the Senate and 100% of the House is revoted on, is elected every 2 years. So this Congress, this 2-year Congress, next 2 years, 2 years before that. So the 112th, which was the last one, the one that we had from 2010 to 2012, that was seen as the most do-nothing Congress. And they say, well, what about the Congress during the Bush years? Well, they did tons of things. They were a rubber stamp for George Bush. They did every single thing that George W. Bush wanted. It didn't mean spending, wars, killing programs, whatever George Bush wanted, they gave it to him. No questions asked. So it'd be nice to call them do nothing, but they did everything that George Bush wanted. So we're in the 113th Congress right now. 112th was from 2010 to 2012. That was initially seen as the do-nothing Congress, but the do-nothing phrase comes from the 80th Congress, which Truman ran against in the 1948 election. They were called the Do-Nothing Congress, and in the election of that year, he ran against them, quite successfully, by the way. So, Congress returned last Monday, and there's tons of things waiting around right now. A major overhaul of immigration is pending in the House. The Farm Bill, we'll get to the Farm Bill in a minute. It passed, but it's really sad the way it passed. The Postal Service is continuing to lose tons of money, and there's no guarantee that any of these issues are going to be dealt with. Even in some of the worst years of partisan gridlock, a deadline had meant something to the Congress, but that was up until 2013. This comes to us from the Huffington Post. Drop-dead dates have come and gone this year, causing real-world consequences. On January 1st, taxes went up not only for affluent families, but for virtually all workers when lawmakers looked the other way and let a payroll tax cut expire. On March 1st, after leaders from both parties declared the automatic across-the-board spending cuts would never happen, that's the sequestration, they happened anyway because of inaction. 100% of Congress opposed the sequestration. It's very important. 100% of them opposed it. And it's the law right now. Think about that. At this time in 2011, Congress had passed 23 laws. Okay? That's the Do Nothing 112. So far, this year, 15 have been passed. It's just one of the 15 that have passed. And by the way, some of the 15 that have passed mean absolutely nothing. Of the 15, one of the 15 that passed was a bill that specifies the size of precious metal blank that would be used in the production of the National Baseball Hall of Fame commemorative coins. Okay. At the same time, lawmakers in both parties fault the Obama administration for leaving Congress to its own devices. So you've got the Republicans in Congress saying, and they're hoping that nobody knows their civics. Okay? I've said this in past shows. It begs repeating, though. The president doesn't write bills. The president doesn't pass bills. The president sets an agenda and appeals to Congress, but the president say the buck stops with the president. Certainly, but he doesn't write bills. He doesn't pass bills. He goes to Congress and says, hey, I would like to see this happen, okay? They're co-equal branches of government. Now, he can sign or veto a bill. He does have that power, but he doesn't get to pass it. So when the Republicans say, hey, you're getting absolutely nothing done, Mr. Obama, well, they are counting on people not knowing how the government works. And for the most part, it has worked. Because if you listen to pretty much anybody talk, certainly anybody on the right, they'll say, hey, liberals, what has Obama done? What has he gotten done? Okay, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, the economy's slow, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Economy's gotten better, by the way, we'll get to that in a minute. But what has he done? Quite honestly, the real question should be, what has Congress gotten done? And they'll go, well, the Democrats had Congress for so many years, blah-de-blah-de-blah, when Obama was first elected, which is not true. They had both houses for about, I think it was 5 or 6 weeks before Ted Kennedy got sick, had to get out of Congress, and then Scott Brown was elected in his seat. Yeah, it didn't take long, and even then they had a razor thin margin, but they got a lot of stuff done in that time. So there's a great article over at the New York Times, suggested reading about the Do Nothing 113th Congress. The idea has always been, especially since the Reagan Revolution, is government is not the solution. Government is the problem. And they're counting on you believing that. I don't think people realize that a vacuum with respect to power, as in who's going to be in charge, exists. And it's going to be filled with one or two things. It's going to be filled with you and I. And you and I are government, by the way. So when they say we want government out of everything, they're saying that they want you out of everything. You, the voter. Because you, even though a lot of people relinquish it, you have all the power in government. But you can't hire people that tell you that they hate government. So, what are we going to do to get things moving in Congress? You may remember at the beginning of the new session, or heading up to the new session, Harry Reid said that he had his finger on the nuclear button, which is to say he was going to blow up the Senate rules and allow no more filibusters, just a simple majority to pass a bill. That's democracy. That's all that the Constitution requires, a simple majority. But when the Republicans filibuster, they're saying that we have to have a supermajority for everything, which is not what it says in the Constitution. Okay, so and then the new Congress came up, and Harry Reid says, "Well, I've talked to McConnell, over in the House, and McConnell's a good guy, or in the Senate, the Senate Minority Leader." And he shook my hand and he said that they're going to stop filibustering everything. He shook the guy's hand. We were all counting on Harry Reid to change the rules, which Harry Reid is the head of the Senate right now, because that's the Democrats have control of the Senate. And he didn't do it. He said, I shook his hand, I looked in his eyes, I believed him, whatever. He's not going to filibuster anymore. And quite honestly, anybody with a set of eyes, set of ears, who's been paying attention to the news has to know that that's all that they're going to do. And that's all the Republicans have done, is filibustered everything. So, Harry Reid, all these months later, almost a year later, yeah, no, well, anyway, has his finger on the nuclear button again. Okay, check this out. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid squared off with his Republican counterpart, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Republican from Kentucky, in a remarkable exchange on the Senate floor Thursday morning. Reid raised the possibility of a mid-season rules change, dubbed the nuclear option, which would prevent Republicans from filibustering White House nominees to agency and cabinet positions. Now, that's very important, because the nuclear option that we were talking about at the beginning of the year would have stopped them from filibustering at all. And right now, all Harry Reid is really asking for is for the Obama administration to get their cabinet positions and their White House nominees. He's saying just give him his staff. But obviously their job, and they say it when they're running for an election, is they say government doesn't work. So their job right now is to make sure government doesn't work. Okay. The majority leader is about to sacrifice his reputation and this institution, McConnell warned, as the two traded charges of breaking their respective words to one another in a tense exchange. When the founders said advise and consent, I don't think they meant sit down and shut up, quote unquote. Strong words from Mitch McConnell, who has no problem breaking his word. It could be said that McConnell has broken his word. That certainly could be said, Reid charged. An agreement, though, is a two-way street. Essentially, McConnell broke his word and didn't think twice about it. And now Reid is saying, you know what, I may just have to break mine. And I hope that he will. I'm not expecting him to. All you need is 6 Republicans, Reid said on the floor of the Senate, suggesting that if enough Republicans join the 54 Democrats in approving the installed nominees, he might be satisfied. If that happens, there would be no complaints. There quite possibly would not be the nuclear option. So we just need 6 Republicans. But the Republicans are a unified front against anything. Progress, the president, the American people, anything. So Senate Democrats are expected to meet later to gauge whether 50 votes exist for what is known alternatively as the nuclear or constitutional option, depending on whether one opposes or supports it. Democrats have had at least 51 votes to change the Senate rules at the beginning of the session, according to a HuffPost account. McConnell has argued that Reid is breaking his word by changing the rules mid-session after promising not to do so, but Reid said, hey, it's a two-way street. McConnell, now here's the part that's really interesting to me. This is going to happen no matter what, by the way, not the Reid thing. Let me finish. McConnell has warned Democrats that using the nuclear option will come back to haunt them when they are once again in the minority. On the Senate floor Thursday, McConnell said that the hard left, and I love the fact that he calls it that. By the way, the hard left means anybody who's not a Republican. There is no soft left to them. Okay, the hard left was pushing for reform and that they were willing to do permanent, irreversible damage to this institution. And it appears as if they've convinced the majority leader to do their bidding. Let me assure you that this Pandora box, once opened, will be utilized again and again by future majorities. So, what Reid is saying is, what McConnell is saying is, if you use the nuclear option, we will use the nuclear option when we get back into power. So you better not do it. But here's the thing. They're gonna do it anyway. Okay, they don't care. They're gonna do it anyway. And for McConnell to say you're causing permanent and irreversible damage to this institution, okay, and to the country, is rich, incredibly rich of him to say. How rich? Considering what the Republicans have already done by holding everything up, only letting 15 bills to pass, using incredibly poisonous language on the talking heads and on the evening news, on Meet the Press, in the House, on the House floor itself. And then there's the Farm Bill. The U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday passed farm legislation that for the first time in 50 years did not include food stamps alongside agricultural subsidies. I don't think a lot of people realize that food stamps are a part of the Farm Bill. Republican House leaders tore the Farm Bill in two after unified legislation failed in a surprising vote last month. Democrats had bolted from the measure because Republican cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program went too far. That's the SNAP program. At the same time, the cuts didn't go far enough for the House GOP, which will probably try to pass a standalone food stamps bill that is even harsher, one that the Democratic-controlled Senate could easily reject. Spokespersons for party leaders said that they were taking only one step at a time and declined to comment on their next proposal for food stamps. House GOP leaders could try to reauthorize SNAP with the 2% cut some Democrats were initially willing to accept, just a 2% cut, or they could push for deeper yet to be defined cuts that might win over some of the 62 Republicans who voted against the Farm Bill in June. Authorizing both farm and nutrition programs expires at the end of September, but that doesn't mean, this is important, it doesn't mean that 47 million Americans, almost a sixth of the nation, get some sort of food assistance. Okay? We're an incredibly rich country. You wouldn't know it because we have 47 million Americans that are potentially going to go hungry. Quite a few of those Americans, by the way, I'm sure, voted for Republicans who wanted the food stamp bill cut. Okay? But congressional appropriations could keep the bill going if the Farm Bill holds. Okay? Even though there is no food stamp cliff, safety net experts worry still that nutrition assistance, which costs about $80 billion annually since the Great Depression, has made more Americans eligible for the program, will be vulnerable without formal reauthorization. Robert Greenstein of the Liberal Center on Budget and Policy Claims warned in a Thursday blog post of a decided risk of Republican threats and actions to shortchange SNAP's appropriation on grounds that the program hasn't been reauthorized. Okay, the Farm Bill passed with lots of money for the big ag companies, and that's it. A lot of low-wage workers, including Walmart workers, are on food stamps right now. This removes food from the mouths of children and working people. And by the way, Democrats tried to protest that when it came up. And here's the thing about when you are the majority in the House and you want to make something like this a matter of public record, you can stand up and say it. Okay, advise and consent. You can stand up and say it. And if it's not objected on by the majority party, anyone in the majority party, then it becomes a matter of the public record. So the permanent public record, the permanent House record. So we would know generations down the road what party it was that took food out of the mouths of working people. And when this came up in the House, Democrat after Democrat after Democrat stood up, tried to make it a part of the public record. And Louis Gohmert would stand up and object, and it'd be stricken from the record. Another Democrat would stand up, try to make it a part of the public record, try to let everyone know who is taking food out of the mouths of working people and children. And Louis Gohmert would stand up again and object. And he objected over and over and over, dozens of times, until it was no longer a part of the permanent record. So, even though we can keep the food stamp program going with congressional appropriations, once it's not already automatically being funded through the Farm Bill, that makes the food stamp program, the SNAP program, vulnerable. And so that's what Democrats are trying to say. They're saying, no, don't take it out. And the Republicans are saying, it's fine if we take it out. You can keep going. You don't need to have it in the Farm Bill. You can have it in a standalone bill. Well, part of the Farm Bill makes it pretty easy to pass. And the Republicans know that if it becomes a standalone bill, becomes something separate, if it's not automatically funded, there's a pretty good chance they can kill it. And that's really what they're looking forward to. So when Republicans do decide to work, do decide to pass something, and it's not a commemorative baseball coin or something else of absolutely no consequence, what is it that they do pass? North Carolina Republicans are pushing legislation that would restrict abortion access, attaching the measure to an unrelated motorcycle safety bill. This was on Wednesday. And giving neither the public nor Democratic legislators any advance notice. The bill passed the State House Judiciary Committee in a 10-5 party line vote. The stealth maneuver came after North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory threatened to veto a similar Senate bill on Wednesday morning. The Senate legislation would require abortion providers to meet strict licensing standards and would mandate that a doctor is present during the entire procedure. The state's top health official has called for lawmakers to slow down on the abortion legislation. And in his 2012 campaign, McCrory pledged, and this is on record, that he would not sign any legislation that would further restrict abortion access. House Republicans tweaked the Senate legislation. A doctor would have to be present when the first drug and an abortion procedure is administered rather than for the entire procedure, and clinics would not have to meet the same standards as ambulatory surgical centers. So they had an abortion bill that they shoved through, and everyone noticed, and McCrory said he wouldn't sign it, and so they dropped it. So then they got this motorcycle bill, which at the top has a lot of motorcycle rules, regulations, right? And they take all that motorcycle legislation and they just move it all the way down, and then they stack abortion things on top of it. And then they give it a 47-word name. It's very it's a really long name. I'm not going to get into it. It's a disgrace to North Carolina that legislators have once again resorted to sneak attacks to move their anti-women's agenda forward, said Planned Parenthood Health System's Melissa Reid in a statement. Once again, there was no public notice that this bill would be heard. The public and even many legislators on the committee only learned of the possibility at 9:57 a.m., 3 minutes before the committee was to meet, when a political reporter was tipped off and posted it on Twitter. It's outrageous and not how the people's business should be conducted. It's often said, legislators are obviously supposed to be working for us. And if you ask them what they're doing and why they're doing it, obviously they always say it's the people's work that they're doing. But if they have to shove things through like this, they have to get them under the radar. They tried to do this in Texas last week, which is, of course, what led to Whitney Davis standing up and giving an unprecedented 13-hour filibuster. Okay? So, let's see. People continue, and I'm going to make this point over and over again, okay? People continue voting for Republicans because they say, well, they want smaller government and they want less spending. But they really have trouble spending money on, say, wars. They just don't want us to spend money on infrastructure or food, okay? And obviously, all they really want is a ton of abortion bills passed, okay? We'll get to more of this in a minute. I've said this, and I'm sorry. I know I'm leaving a lot of pregnant pauses here, but it's it's pretty simple, okay? You can't govern if you don't believe in government, okay? And restricting women's access to, and by the way, Planned Parenthood, a very small part of what they do is abortion. Most of what they do is women's health. So, as much as they like to say these are anti-abortion bills, and the news is even diplomatic when they say, well, these are just anti-abortion bills, they're anti-women bills. If we had legislation tomorrow that we drafted and passed that said that men had to go through all kinds of hoops before they wanted to get Viagra, it wouldn't get a single vote. It wouldn't even be considered. Okay? I think even if we had women running these houses, these state houses, and state senates, I don't even think women would be passing bills to restrict men's access to Viagra. I'm sorry, that's the only Viagra, or condoms, or whatever. I'm trying to think of the equivalent. Obviously, men don't have babies, so we can't say restrict men's access to abortion. Well, men don't have them. But there's all these men who have no problem standing up and telling a woman what to do with their body. The Republicans think that their only job in government is to restrict abortion access. And the only reason they're doing that is so they can solidify their teabagger base, so that they can get reelected and so that they can pass bills that only help big multinational corporations in foreign governments. And, of course, the top 1%. It has nothing to do with you. Let's move on to Santorum and Texas. By the way, Texas unfortunately passed their anti-abortion bill. It took them quite a few special sessions, but they unfortunately passed their anti-abortion bill. So, as Texas legislators inch closer on Thursday to passing one of the most extreme anti-abortion bills in the country, former Senator Rick Santorum showed up to criticize the media for portraying the legislation as radical instead of something else altogether. A movement of love. Quote unquote, a movement of love. The repackaging of this is astounding. By the way, I think everyone should go Google Santorum. Not now, after the show. I'll remind you before I go off the air. Texas lawmakers pushing through the anti-abortion measure, among other things. The bill would ban abortions past 20 weeks of pregnancy and require that all abortions, including those induced by the pill, to be performed in ambulatory surgical centers, which would shutter. Same in North Carolina, same in Texas, nearly all of the state's abortion clinics. It would leave maybe one or two. Santorum says there's very little praise within the media. It's just scorn. Santorum said some people's reactions to the bill, even today in the Republican Party, there is maybe reaching scorn. Oh, my goodness. Democrats, including President Barack Obama, are cheering Democratic Texas Senator Wendy Davis for filibustering for 11 hours during the last legislative session, ultimately hoping to kill it. The face of the pro-life movement is people out there every day embracing women. We're back to Santorum now. Whether they decide to have an abortion or not, they love them. It's a movement of love, and that's what the movement is all about. One Democrat, Senator Carlos Uresti, proposed amending the bill to make exceptions for women who become pregnant after being victimized by rape or incest. But, of course, Republicans voted it down. So Santorum steps in and just, he says what we obviously expect him to say, and tries to call it love. In Virginia, when Bob McDonnell passed the vaginal ultrasound bill, or the bald vaginal ultrasound bill was passed, and then he said he was going to sign it, and he eventually became known as Governor Ultrasound. Think about how these conservatives say that they want small government, but have no problem forcing you, ladies, to all my ladies out there, no problem forcing something into your Virginia. That seems to me pretty invasive for a group of people that are claiming small government. Okay? And what is happening is not a movement of love. I said this a minute ago, but it bears repeating. It's a bunch of men telling women what to do with their bodies. Gentlemen, we've had enough. So we had the sequester ultimately pass a number of months ago when Congress was unable to reach an agreement on spending cuts. Okay, when Bush was president, obviously there was money as far as the eye could see. We had no problem spending money. Wars, tax cuts, it didn't matter. Everybody, please. We were dropping pallets of cash in the middle of Iraq and saying we don't know what happened to it. Whatever, $9 billion, gone. Who cares, right? The war's going to cost $1 trillion, fine. $2 trillion, fine. We've got the money, right? But the minute Barack Obama became president, all of a sudden we don't have any money anymore. We are in dire straits. There's nothing left. We have to cut everything. No, not the things that help out the rich and, corporations. And no, not that stuff. Only the things that help the poor. Okay? Because we have no money. We're broke, which is a lie. Once again, back to civics, a lot of people don't understand. We are not broke. We're probably running at about 120% of GDP right now. Or, 100%. Sorry, 100%. But after World War II, we're running at 120%. Vastly more than we are now. And what we did was we spent our way out of it. A lot of people out of work. A lot of infrastructure needed to be done. We had a man dig a hole. We had a man fill a hole. Whatever it took to put money back in regular people's pockets. And they say, well, we need to give more tax cuts to the rich. We need to give the rich people more money. Well, why? Think about think about this. If you give, and by the way, I'm just a regular middle class guy. You give me $1 million, I'll save some of it. But there's a pretty fat chance I'm going to go out and spend an obscene amount of it. Okay? Case in point. You give $1 million to, I don't want to say Trump, I think he's broke right now. You give $1 million to Bill Gates. You think Bill Gates is going to run out and spend that million? No, chances are, he's a billionaire. He's going to go ahead and just throw it on the pile. So the argument that we need to give the rich more money and they will spend it it doesn't work. That doesn't make any sense. Okay? Regular money, or regular people get money into their pockets, they're going to spend it. That makes sense. Okay? So, after World War II, we put money into the pockets of regular people. They went out and spent it, and that brought the economy back. Okay? Up until Reagan, we had just the largest GDP growth. The middle class grew at an alarming rate, just a huge rate. Unions, I mean, fair pay for work. I mean, things were just going awesome until we got Ronald Reagan, and he said, "What? Government's the problem." Government's not the solution. Government's the problem. See what happened? People were kind of looking to hear something like that because at that time interest rates had gotten just obscene. I think interest rates were over 20 points. So anyway, the new numbers are out for this month. The federal government on Thursday reported a rare surplus of $116.5 billion in June, the largest single month in 5 years. The gain kept the nation on track for its lowest annual deficit in 5 years. The June surplus was due in part to $66.3 billion in dividend payments from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the mortgage giants that were taken over by the government at the height of the 2008 financial crisis and are now repaying taxpayers for the support that they received. Through the first 8 months of the budget year, the deficit has totaled $509.8 billion, according to the Treasury. That's nearly $400 billion lower than the same period last year. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, forecast the annual deficit will be $670 billion when the budget year ends on September 30th. If correct, that would be well below the last year's deficit of $1.09 trillion and the lowest since President Barack Obama took office, although it'd still be the fifth largest in U.S. history. Defense spending is down 7%. A better job market has also helped lower spending for unemployment benefits. Okay, the national debt currently at $16.7 trillion. Now, the improving deficit picture has taken pressure off negotiators to raise the federal borrowing limit, although that battle is likely to resurface in the fall. Obama has remained at odds with Republicans over cutting benefit programs and imposing further tax increases. The deficit reached $1.41 trillion in budget year 2009, which began 4 months after Obama took office, which is about the time that the Republicans are willing to admit that we even had a deficit. President George W. Bush also ran large deficits through most of his 2 terms in office after he won approval for broad tax cuts and lost wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Most of the money problems that we have obviously came from the wars and the tax cuts. That's the biggest. Last time the government ran an annual surplus was in 2001. Most of that money was spent on tax cuts and wars, right? Things that really didn't help the economy. And I guess spending on war helps the economy a little bit because, we pay soldiers. So, but once again, the Republicans had no problem giving Bush all kinds of money. All of a sudden, there was a problem when Obama got into office. So now we're starting to run a surplus. And things aren't looking so bleak. I think it's time that Obama, by the way, government jobs are still hemorrhaging. A lot of private sector jobs are what's growing. So what you'll hear on the Talking Heads on Sunday is a bunch of Republicans saying, well, that's because the government's growing out of control. They don't live in a reality-based world. And what's to say that they have to? But I think it's time for Obama to re-wage the fight and say, you know what? We're a sovereign nation with our own money. And we've got plenty of it. And there's no reason why people have to suffer. Unemployment's at 7%, but it doesn't even have to be there. The housing market's back up again, right? But honestly, it could all be better. And if the country is truly in debt, saying if I'm in debt and I want to get myself out of debt, perhaps the first thing I should do is quit my job. Well, that's essentially what they're saying. They're saying, well, the country's in debt, so we should stop making money. We should stop spending money. That doesn't help. I think it's time Obama rewages this fight with the Republicans and says, you know what, we're going to start spending on infrastructure again. Roads in disrepair, bridges collapsing. Really, let's put some Americans to work. I think it's a fabulous idea, and I think now would be a great time for it. I want to get into some good news. Now, this first story is going to sound like good news, bad news. And then I want to get into Oregon, the state that I work in. On Tuesday, a Walmart executive rebuked the D.C. Council in an op-ed in the Washington Post, declaring that the company would scuttle plans for 3 stores if the city enacted a living wage law targeted at big box retailers. The bill, which passed the council vote on Wednesday, would require a $12.50 minimum wage for workers at companies with more than $1 billion in global sales. For those who follow Walmart's labor disputes, that $12.50 living wage seemed quite close to another figure commonly associated with the world's largest retailer, its average store worker wage as reported by the company. Now, mind you, these are the company's numbers. According to Walmart, full-time store workers earn $12.78 an hour on average, or 28 cents higher than the proposed D.C. mandate. That's an average wage, quite different from the starting wage. But considering the Walmart footprint leans heavily suburban and rural, a $12.50 starting wage in one of the most expensive cities in the country wouldn't seem too out of whack with Walmart's self-reported wage data. It's hard to know how much Walmart workers are actually making because they won't disclose how much their part-time workers actually earn. They've been incredibly secretive about how much they pay people. They say, hey, on average, our full-time workers make $12.78 an hour. Okay? Walmart wants to claim poverty right now with these 3 DC stores and say that they can't pay $12.50 an hour. So what they've done is they've said that they say, Walmart's saying we are paying our employees $12.78 an hour on average, which by the way is not a starting wage, it's an average wage. Okay, so if you want us to pay $12.50 in DC, well, why don't you just leave that up to us and not pass a law that says that? It's not, that says that we you don't pass a law saying that we have to pay a living wage. We will go ahead and pay the living wage. Honor system. Their honor system, right? But only they report their own numbers. Okay? So DC says, well, you know what? If you're paying $12.78 an hour, then you can handle if we pass a bill that says you got to pay $12.50. And by the way, DC is one of the most expensive cities to live in. Okay? And the bill passed. And Walmart has now pulled out. They're not going to build those 3 stores in D.C. And I say good. Who cares? We have enough Walmarts. We don't need more. The economic impact from Walmart is pretty insane. I believe the numbers for the 3 Walmart heirs, the 3 people, okay, collect more money every year than the bottom 100 million people. Than the bottom 100 million people in America, or excuse 100 million or 50 million. Even if it's 50 million, that's insane that these 3 people make more than the bottom 50 million do. And for them to claim we can't afford to pay that, it's a lie. As I said earlier, most of their employees are on government assistance because they don't pay enough to their employees. And I want to say good on D.C. for passing the living wage bill. Nobody who works should starve. Nobody who works should be without a home. Nobody who works should even have to be without the creature comforts that make life worth living. Okay, every family should make enough money to live, to have some money to put away for a rainy day, money to retire, money to go on vacation. And for Walmart to make the case that they can't afford to pay people a living wage because they just can't afford it, which is a flat-out lie, because that company has more money than most countries do. And I'd just like to say, good on D.C. I hate Walmart. Sorry. I'm going to let my colors show. I hate Walmart. I don't like what they do. I don't like the way they treat their employees. I don't like how anti-union they are. Low wages. I don't shop there. I don't darken their doors, they say. On to more. Good news. And yeah, by the way, canceling 3 stores in D.C. is good news. Really, had those stores came into D.C., really, every time they come into town, they just kill jobs anyway. And that's been nicely documented in quite a few places. Not the least of which is a documentary I'd like to recommend called The Walmart, the high cost of low prices. Okay, so Oregon legislature, this was major national news. Oregon legislature unanimously passes tuition-free higher education. Oh yeah, you heard me right. Advocates of the legislation are calling it the pay-it-forward model. Students will be able to initially attend state universities free of cost. Upon graduating, students will pay 3% of their paycheck for 24 years in order to help fund the program for future students. The model is partially based on the Australian model, which has been fairly successful. Students will be able to enter college without the fear of being buried in debt by the time they graduate. Currently, students who attend universities in Oregon graduate with an average of $24,616 in debt. I'll get back to this in just a second. I listened to a money talk show hosted by a gentleman named Clark Howard, and for him to get a phone call from somebody who says that they owe $50,000, $100,000, $120,000, sometimes over $200,000 for their college education. Now, those folks generally became a lawyer or a doctor when he starts hearing numbers in the 200,000s. But think about that. Wow, a house. Like what your education cost, you could have bought a house, and you're a wage slave now, and you're going to carry that around for the rest of your days, or most of the rest of your days. The bill passed the Oregon legislature unanimously on Monday, ironically the same day that federal interest rates doubled on subsidized Stafford loans from 3.4% to 6.8%. The bill is expected to be signed into law by Governor Kitzhaber this month. The legislation directs the state's Higher Education Coordination Commission to develop a pay-it-forward pilot project set to launch in 2015, so we're just a couple of years away. The advantage is all payments for the program will go to the cost of the program. Okay? What they're trying to do is eliminate the role that banks are playing in charging interest and fees to students. And yeah, since the banks have come into education, it's been absolute poison. It's been havoc to our country, honestly. Oregon will become the first state to implement the Pay It Forward program. Students can only hope that plans similar to these will spread around to states in order to help relieve the burden of student debt. This is the first step to empower the future middle class of America. What's happening with a lot of student debt right now is a lot of the same thing that happened with the mortgage crisis. A lot of mortgages, the mortgage restrictions were loosened. A lot of people were sold mortgages. Those mortgages were then repackaged into derivatives, and those derivatives were sold onto the open market. When too many of those were out there, between 7 and 900 billion, I believe that there were, 7 and 900 trillion, of derivatives ended up out there. When those collapsed, it collapsed the economy. Now, there's two sides to the belief that the student loan debt crisis, which is well over $1 trillion right now, could lead to another collapse of the economy. I think it could, because they are being sold the same way that the mortgages were, and I think that it could happen again. But I read an interesting article that suggested that no, the amount that was in mortgages is not the same amount that's in student loans. I mean, there was way more mortgages than there is in student loans, so it couldn't happen again because it's not to the same level. But it's the same idea. All of this debt, which student debt is the only thing that you cannot discharge. And that law was passed, obviously, by the Congress with a lot of help from the banks. They wrote the law so that people become wage debt slaves. Let's get banks out of the education business. They have no place there. I'd like to take them out of the housing business, but they have to loan money for houses. Fine. Get out of banks. If you have your money in a bank right now, especially an American bank, get it the hell out. Sorry, I mean to bark at you. Go to a credit union. Okay? As a member of a credit union, you're a part owner. You'll get better rates. You won't get screwed over. I've got 2 home loans through a credit union, and there's no prepayment penalty. It's the same thing they did to a lot of people. Prepayment penalties. You try to pay your house off early. They want that debt to collapse so that banks can make more money. So, good on Oregon. I certainly hope to see it pass in some other states because student debt is out of control. And I know too many people that have student loan debt. And it's unfortunate and it's unnecessary. Exodus chapter 20, verse 13, one of the commandments. And I quote, "You shall not commit murder." Now, why am I pointing this out? Quite often I'm told, obviously by people on the right, that we are a Christian nation. And obviously it's not true. We are a secular nation. We broke off from England so that we could be our own nation, so that we wouldn't be told what to worship or how to worship, okay? It's total freedom of and from religion. And I make this point with respect to the Zimmerman trial, which wrapped up today, Saturday. The very fact that Zimmerman went on trial for murder proves that we are not a Christian nation. Because if we were, the Bible's quite clear about this. You shall not kill. It's against God's law to kill. And Zimmerman and the rest of the news media, and the police reports and all the rest, have never ever said that George Zimmerman didn't kill Trayvon Martin. It's a well-known fact, and everybody's owned up to it, including Zimmerman himself. And when questioned on Sean Hannity's program on Fox News, Hannity asked Zimmerman if he could do it all again, would he do it any differently? And Zimmerman unequivocally said no. Zimmerman believes that he's absolutely in the right. I don't know what Zimmerman's religion is, or if he even has one, but the people that are standing behind Zimmerman right now, that are supporting Zimmerman right now, are the white nationalists. They are the teabaggers. They are the gun nuts. They're the pro-war, anti-social welfare, anti-abortion, pro-murder. Absolutely. I mean, to say that they don't want us to have to have abortions in the United States, but they don't care if a child starves to death, which is a very real possibility, or lives on the streets and starves. Them killing the food stamp program shows that they don't really care. They're not really pro people. They're not really pro life. Okay, and so all the people that are supposedly pro life are generally behind Zimmerman. What happens with any issue, and it's really unfortunate, is when it becomes political. Because politics is a war. And just like any war, the first casualty is the truth. And the George Zimmerman case was no different. Even on the way it was told on the news, a lot of news outlets began calling it the Trayvon Martin case. Now, why is that? Why is it the Trayvon Martin case? Is he on trial for his own cold-blooded murder? Here are the parts of the case that are not in contest. Zimmerman says he noticed the young man walking down the street on a dark and rainy night, and he called 911. And on the 911 tape, you can hear Zimmerman calling Trayvon Martin an effing coon. Now, forgive my coarse language. I don't want to sugarcoat this at all. Zimmerman gets out of the car and confronts Trayvon. And then after that is where the contesting begins. There's word that, from Zimmerman, of course, that he was just jumped on by Trayvon. And he had his head repeatedly slammed into the ground, and he was straddled, and he was beaten. And I have no doubt that Trayvon did straddle Zimmerman, and did beat him pretty good. But Trayvon was on the phone with somebody, with his girlfriend at the time, and he mentioned to his girlfriend, I'm being followed, and that probably scared the hell out of him. And when he was approached, I seriously doubt that Zimmerman walked up to him and said, "Hey man, do you need a ride? It's kind of raining outside. I'm pretty sure Zimmerman went up to him, knowing that Zimmerman had a gun in his pocket, and confronted him. And this led to a scuffle. And this led to the two men exchanging blows. I'm sure of it. Physical fisticuffs. A physical altercation. And I feel fairly certain that when Zimmerman began losing that altercation, that's when Zimmerman decided to pull his gun and shoot 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. It took 44 days and a public uproar before he was finally arrested for the crime. And when he was arrested, he was released pretty quickly because he put up a website. Zimmerman put up a website raising all kinds of money for his defense. And a lot of people got behind the Zimmerman story for gun reasons or for race reasons or for whatever it was. But all the pro-life, pro-war, pro-murder people, pro-gun, got behind Zimmerman. On Saturday, Zimmerman was acquitted of that, of the murder charge. Not guilty, but not innocent. As I sit here today, there is a lot going on outside of this studio, both in my own city and in other cities across the nation, because a precedent has just been set. A man who began a confrontation with a black unarmed child. I'm sorry, I know he's 17, but he's a child. Got away with that child's murder. Thanks to the Stand Your Ground laws, which were drafted by NRA and ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the conservative American Legislative Exchange Council. And a precedent has now been set because George Zimmerman got away with murder, cold-blooded murder. Had Zimmerman not gotten out of the car, and by the way, when he called the non-emergency 911 number, had Zimmerman not gotten out of the car, Trayvon would still be alive. Zimmerman would still be a free man, and they would honestly be going on about their lives right now. I've read quite a bit of discussion already since this has happened, and the folks who are on Zimmerman's side are gleeful. Gleeful about the murder of a child, gleeful about what they're calling the rule of law, which wasn't the rule of law until 2006. These, the castle laws, the old castle laws, which are now the Stand Your Ground laws, weren't really passed into existence until 2006. So the rule of law before that, George Zimmerman would be in prison for killing that child. And now he's not. So now a precedent has been set. That is, it is okay that if someone is suspicious looking, that you can stalk them, you can follow them, confront them, and kill them, and get away with it. And unfortunately, especially in this case, Trayvon Martin was African American, which we know now, thanks to the 911 call or the non-emergency call that he made, because George Zimmerman made well over 100 calls that year to that number every time he saw somebody black walking through his neighborhood or driving through his neighborhood. And he'd always be calling on because someone black is out there. So as much as I don't want to bring the racial aspect into this, it is very much a part of this. It's very important to this case. Because, yeah, he killed Trayvon Martin, who was African American, and had he not made hundreds of calls to the non-emergency 911 number, I could overlook the fact that Trayvon was African American. But it would be unjust for me to do that now, because there's a track record of him going after African Americans. And he's like, oh, they always get away. They always get away. And on this day, George Zimmerman decided, in his words, that this coon wasn't going to get away. What's going to happen over the next number of weeks and months remains to be seen. But already, this case has caused a massive uproar. There's about a third of Americans who agree with the case, and well over two-thirds that absolutely do not agree with the case and see it as a grave injustice. So what's going to happen over the next number of weeks and months? It could be riots. It could be violence. It could be relooking at the Stand Your Ground laws. We don't know at this point. On the plus side, George Zimmerman will never be a free man. Even though he got away with murder, even though he was exonerated and he can't be tried again because of the double jeopardy laws, he will never be a free man. He will never get to go out in public. George Zimmerman is now talking about going back to law school so he can help people who were wrongly accused like he was. He wasn't wrongly accused. He admitted to murder in a Christian nation. And too many of the Christians in this nation got behind him. Obviously, you'll hear from me on this subject again in next week's show. That's my final word. I want to thank you all for tuning in once again to another episode of The Fire You Can't Put Out, episode 25. Join us again next week because you know what? I can't stop doing this. I just love doing this show. Thank you again for your support, everybody. I am Melvin, and I will catch you next week. Despair is not an option. Be good to yourself and others. Thank you.